Hello. I hope you find this story interesting. Your feedback, suggestions, and subscriptions are always welcome. Sometimes we think we know a person with whom we have lived our whole lives. But what if, after decades of living together, you find out that it was all an illusion? Margaret Williams was preparing for a quiet retirement. But one day she found out that her life had never been what she had imagined. Margaret and Tom had been together for 42 years. They went through hardships, raised their children, and built a future together. They always dreamed of a carefree old age. Just a little longer, Meg, and we'll go live on the coast. Tom said, looking at a photo of a small house by the sea. She believed him. Why should she have doubted him? When Tom died suddenly, her world stopped. She was sad, but at least she knew she had something to live for. They had enough savings. Their house had been paid off long ago. She just had to live and cherish her memories. But it was only an illusion. A few weeks after the funeral, Margaret received a letter from the bank. She thought it was just a simple notice. But when she opened the envelope, she froze. There was a demand to repay a debt for an amount she could not even imagine. Her hands trembled. What debt? Tom had never mentioned it. Yet that night Margaret realized she knew nothing about her husband's financial life, and this truth was about to destroy everything she had left. Though the pain of the loss had not yet subsided, and life had already prepared a new blow. Margaret believed that after her husband's death, she would at least have financial stability. But when she opened that letter from the bank, her world turned upside down again. She sat in the kitchen, holding the envelope in her shaking hands, the lines blurred before her eyes. Dear Mrs. We are a Williams. We are informing you of a debt of $320,000. She read it again and again, but the numbers remained the same. Her husband had not left her an inheritance, but debts. There must be some mistake, she whispered. Tom had never told her about the loans. He always said they were safe. She grabbed the phone and called the bank. The operator spoke in a polite but cold tone. Yeses. You, Williams, your husband took out several loans against your home. What? You need to start making payments soon or the property will be repossessed. Margaret felt a chill run through her body. They could take her house. But she began to go through Tom's papers. She pulled out folders, bills, old envelopes. The deeper she dug, the more frightening the truth became. Loans. Credits. Overdue payments. He hid it from her for years. If she doesn't pay this debt, she would be left with nothing. How could it be that she had lived with a man for so many years, but didn't know the most important thing, and most importantly, what to do now? Take out a few loans. No. Tom was hiding much more than that. Margaret thought she had lived an honest and peaceful life with him, but now she realized it was only an illusion. She sat among the scattered envelopes and bank statements. The more she read, the more she felt sick with horror. There were not just one or two loans. There were dozens of them. Credit cards, lines of credit, personal loans. Tom had been lying to her for years. He took out his first big loan 20 years ago. At the time, everything seemed trivial, just a small loan for repairs, Meg, no big deal. But then there was another one, and then another. He was getting himself into a debt hole, and each time he found a new way to hide it. Margaret thought back to all those years when she hadn't suspected a thing. The traveling, the gifts, the beautiful house. Where did the money come from? Now she knew the answer. He wasn't making more money. He was just covering one lie with another. Among the papers she found another envelope, a legal document. Her heart sank. Tom hadn't just taken out loans. He'd signed the house over to the bank 2 years ago. Nothing belonged to her. Margaret was left with no money, no inheritance, and possibly no roof over her head. What else was he hiding? And most importantly, what should she do now? Oh, when it seems that things can't get any worse, life proves otherwise. Margaret hasn't yet recovered from her husband's outright lie, but problems did not wait. They burst into her life without warning. Margaret was sitting at her desk, trying to come up with a plan of action. Suddenly there was a knock at the door, loudly. Insistently, she felt an inexplicable fear. As she opened the door and saw two strangers in formal suits standing on the threshold. Miss Williams. Yes, we represent a credit card company. Your husband had a large debt with us. Margaret clutched the doorknob. I know. But he's dead. That doesn't change the fact that the debt must be paid. She led them into the living room. One of the men pulled out a file of documents. Your house was used as collateral. I didn't know anything about that. But it's a fact. If you don't start making payments, the property will be repossessed by the bank. Her heart beat faster. How much time do I have? The man sighed. 30 days. They left and Margaret nearly fainted. A month. Just a month to find the money or lose everything. She looked at the walls, at the photos, at the things she had collected over the years. And she imagined how it would all become someone else's. She couldn't let that happen. But what could she do? Margaret was on the brink of disaster. But did she have any chance of saving the day? Margaret believed that in the worst moments of life, family would always support her. But what if the very people you thought were your family turned their backs? What if they knew the truth but kept silent? Margaret sat in the kitchen, holding the phone in her hands. She dialed the number of her son, Brian. Mom, what's wrong? She sighed heavily. Tom left me with debts I didn't even know I had. She paused. I know, Brian finally answered. Margaret's breath caught in her throat. What? I knew about my father's debts. You knew, and you didn't tell me. We thought he could handle it. Brian replied dryly. She clutched the phone in her shaking hands. Whose? We. Me and Lisa. Margaret almost dropped the phone. Her own children knew the truth, and they were silent. Mom, I know you're upset, Brian continued. Upset? I'm losing my house, and you just watched. And what could we have done? You could have at least warned me. There was silence. And then her son said something that dropped a stone in her heart. We can't help you financially. Margaret froze. Are you kidding? We have expenses, loans, children. So I'm not your mother anymore. Brian didn't say anything. Then he just hung up the phone. Margaret sat in silence for a long time. All her life she had given her children love, care, and support. And when her darkest hour came, they simply turned away. Now she knew she was alone in this fight. But she would not give up. She would find a way to protect herself, even if it meant going all the way. Margaret had no one else to rely on. Her husband had ruined her future, and her children were simply left to fend for themselves. She was facing the loss of everything if she didn't find a way out. But what if there was no way out? Here as she reread the legal documents from the bank, 30 days. If she didn't find the money, she would be thrown out of the house. What was left for her to do? Lawyer. Perhaps there was a loophole that would allow her to postpone the payments or challenge the debt. She opened the phone and started calling all the lawyers she knew. Mrs. Williams, you have little chance. One lawyer said dryly, But it's not my debt. It is in your husband's name, but you are his rightful heir. And if I refuse to inherit, then you will lose all your property, including the house. Margaret felt herself panicking. What should I do? The lawyer was silent and then said, You have two options. You can declare bankruptcy and lose everything. Or you can try to negotiate with the bank." Margaret laughed through her tears. "Negotiate? They don't want to negotiate. That leaves us with the last option." "Which one?" The lawyer sighed. "Sell the house yourself before the bank does it for you. Sell the only thing she has left. Is there any other way out?" There was no more time. Margaret thought she had already experienced the worst. But the real blow was still to come. Because sometimes even the dead can hurt. The next morning, Margaret received a letter from her lawyer. It was marked urgent. She tore open the envelope and began to read. A few seconds later, her breath caught in her throat. The will. Tom had changed it 2 months before he died, and there was something terrible in it. Her heart pounded as she reread the lines. The house she'd thought was hers wasn't hers. He had left it to another woman. Hack. Margaret read it again, naming Diane Mitchell. Who is this woman? And why did her husband leave her everything? Margaret grabbed the phone and called her lawyer. "This must be a mistake." "No, Missers. Tom officially signed the house over to this person before he died." "But I'm his wife." Yes, but the will is legally valid." Margaret felt her legs give out. She wasn't just losing her house to debt. She had never owned it. Margaret started looking for information. She opened her laptop and put her name into the search. A minute later, she found the answer that made her sick. Diana Mitchell is a young woman in her 30s. She shared photos with Tom on social media. He cheated on her for years and left everything to his mistress. Margaret had nothing left. But now she had a purpose. Diana would get what she deserved. There was nothing left. No money, home. Even her memories were now tainted with lies. But if they thought Margaret would just give up, they were wrong. The next morning, Margaret's phone rang. An unknown number. She picked up the phone. "Margaret, it's Diana." Her heart was pounding against her chest. "Hello, did you have the decency to call me?" Listen, I didn't know Tom was going to leave me the house." "Don't lie to me." Silence fell on the other end of the line. "If you think you're going to get it for nothing." No, Margaret's voice trembled with rage. "It's not my fault that Tom decided to do this. You've ruined my life. Look, I don't want any trouble. Let's get together." Margaret held her breath. Okay. But be prepared to look me in the eye. They met in a small cafe. Diana was younger than Margaret had imagined. Stylish, well-groomed, but nervous in her eyes. "What do you want?" Margaret asked sharply. Tom. He said he didn't want you to be left with nothing." Margaret laughed. "Oh, did he? And that's why he left me only debts." Diana looked away. "Listen, I'm ready to give you the money." What?" "I'll sell the house and give you a cut." Margaret bit her lip. This was a chance to get something, but to accept money from her husband's mistress. That was bitter. What was more important, pride or survival? Would Margaret accept the offer? When you are betrayed, there are only 2 ways to go: accept and move on. Take revenge and feel satisfied. But what if neither option feels right? Margaret is left with nothing. And now she also has to decide whether to accept help from the woman who ruined her life. Diana was silent, waiting for an answer. Margaret looked at her, trying to understand, is this sincere remorse? Or is it just a desire to pay off? "And do you think money will change anything?" Diana sighed. "It won't bring your husband back. It won't change the past. But it can help you start a new life." Margaret clenched her fists. "I wasn't supposed to have a new life. We were supposed to live together and be happy." Diana looked down. "I thought so too." Margaret imagined herself making a public scandal, telling everyone about Tom, his infidelities, his debts. How Diana would become an outcast, how everything would be taken away from her. This thought seemed so tempting. Or a but would it make her happy? Or would it just make her as angry as Tom? Margaret leaned back and exhaled loudly. All right, Diane. Sell the house. But what? And I don't want to hear your name anymore. Diana smiled slightly. It's a deal. Is it possible to let go of the past if it left deep wounds in you? And did Margaret really choose the right path? When you lose everything, it seems that life is over. But what if it's just a new beginning? Margaret has made a choice. But will it bring her peace? 3 weeks later, the house was sold. Margaret sat in the notary's office, watching Deanna sign the documents. Some of the money went into her account. Not all of it. But it was enough to start her life from scratch. Diana looked up. I hope you find peace. Margaret didn't say anything. She just took the check and walked out. Gone forever. When the bank door closed behind her, Margaret felt a strange emptiness. She expected it to be easier, that it would close all her wounds. But the past does not let go so easily. She lost the house she had invested years of her life in, and the person she trusted, and even the family that betrayed her. Margaret walked down the street for a long time before stopping at a small real estate agency. In the window was an offer to rent a small apartment near the ocean. It was not luxurious, but it was a new beginning. Margaret took a deep breath and went inside. Is it possible to start life from scratch when you are over 60? Or do wounds from the past stay with us forever? What is left for a person when they lose everything? Despair, loneliness, or perhaps freedom. Margaret no longer had a home, a husband, or even trust in her family, but for the first time in a long time, she could decide for herself. Margaret sat on the ocean shore. The wind blew her hair, and the waves rolled quietly onto the sand. She had never imagined that she would meet her old age like this. Not in the house she had spent years building. Not next to the man she trusted. But for the first time in her life, she felt peace. The phone in her pocket vibrated. A message from her song. Mom, I know what we did was wrong. Can you forgive us? Margaret looked at the screen, but was in no hurry to answer. Or she didn't know if she could. Or if she wanted to. Some things change us forever. Margaret had no more attachments. She had no responsibilities. She didn't even have clear plans. But she found something she hadn't had all these years. She found herself. Is it possible to start over when it seems that life has already passed? Margaret did not know the answer, but she was ready to look for it. What would you do if you were Margaret? Is it possible to forgive such a betrayal? Write in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel.